It's a bird. No, it's a plane. No, it's Superman. Before Superman flew into the hearts and minds of the American public in the late 1930s, another thing was dominating the skies. And it wasn't a bird, nor was it a plane. It was an airship. But airships are pretty obsolete nowadays. Why? Because on one blustering night back in 1937 in New Jersey. Hi, my name is Gabe Bauer, and this is Top Shelf History, where we combine great stories with great drinks. This is the Steel Balloon. It is the drink I have made for you based on the incredibly disastrous demise of the Hindenburg, who met its fatal end on May 6, 1937. The drink is made with three simple ingredients: Jägermeister, Jack Daniel's Honey, and Eyinger Dark Dunkel Beer. The drink is as interesting as the story it is based on, and one that is certainly worth a try. The airship was invented by a Frenchman named Henri Giffard in 1852, which was 51 years prior to the Wright brothers' initial flight with the airplane. But there are several major differences, of course, in the construction of an airship than would be in the operation of an airplane. Firstly, an airship uses gases that are lighter than just standard breathable air in order to create buoyancy. And back then, the gas that was used was hydrogen at the time. Now, hydrogen was very efficient at lifting you off the ground, but it had the ever so slightly problematic part that it was highly flammable and susceptible to explosions. Kind of sounds dangerous, mostly because it is, and it worked pretty well, but obviously it had its dangers. Now, of course, by the 1930s, a lot of changes had come to the airship. These weren't just hot air balloons up in the sky. They were really massive, impressive dirigibles. Perhaps the most impressive of these new airships was the LZ-129 Hindenburg, which began construction in 1931 and would make its maiden voyage in 1936 with 86 passengers flying from Friedrichshafen to Löwenthal. And after successful goes between those two places and many more tests to ensure safety and to make sure that the ship would stay up with no problems, the Hindenburg offered transatlantic flights. Fantastic stuff. And they had scheduled many of them to America and to other countries. In fact, the Hindenburg even partnered with the American Airlines to take people from Lakehurst, New Jersey and travel all the way over to Newark aboard the Hindenburg, just kind of as a nice little taxi service. Imagine that for an Uber, huh? Be pretty crazy to have. But of course you may be thinking, this is 1936, 1937, and wasn't Germany in the hands of the Nazis? Yes, they were. So you may be wondering, why is American Airlines partnering with them? Well, we didn't go to war yet, and neither did Germany entirely. World War II only started in 1939 with the invasion of Poland, so at this point the Nazis really hadn't ruffled any feathers in America just yet. With that, on the night of May 6th, 1937, after a very long flight coming from Frankfurt, Germany, the passengers, 97 in total, were ready to disembark at Lakehurst in Manchester Township, New Jersey. And as the airship was coming in for its final descent at 7 p.m., it had been battling with strong winds and stormy weather all day. In fact, it actually delayed their landing by quite some time. And finally, it had cleared up just enough for Captain Max Pruss to finally pull the ship in for that final landing. And as he's coming in towards the final landing, ready to drop his mooring line so the grounds crew can secure the ship, they had to make a hard left turn in order to battle with an easterly wind. Unfortunately, right as the ship had turned where the winds were now stable with the direction of the ship, the winds had changed to the southeast and everything started to tilt. This caused a whole lot of havoc, and Max Pruss is trying to fight all of these different things happening. Some of the mooring lines were actually secured at the time that people had looked up at the ship and they noticed that there was a slight blue flame coming from the rear of the ship. No one really knows where it was coming from or whether it was a static discharge or perhaps something else that may have caused this blue flame. There's many different theories, but they also noticed that the ship was starting to deflate a little bit. And with that, disaster was about to strike. At 7:21, the rear part of the ship was now engulfed in fire with ventilation shafts 4 and 5 set entirely ablaze. As the ship started to tilt with its rear coming down, or stern first, it finally made contact with the ground and the fire started to push up through the rest of the airship, finally breaking through the nose at the front of the ship, and the entire thing came crashing down. Within less than a minute, the Hindenburg was entirely up in flames and had been destroyed, with many horrified onlookers. It's amazing to think that in a disaster that ended so quickly and so violently that there were any survivors at all. But there were only 36 fatalities in total, 35 of them being passengers of the Hindenburg, with 1 grounds crewman losing their life in the disaster. This was also one of the most well-known events, with the newsreels, the pictures, the video, the radio man. Everybody kind of saw the destruction, how violent it was, and how tragic it was of this massive airship coming down, that it really put an end to using it in total. And that's really kind of why you don't really see them today. And with that, let's get into our drink, the steel balloon. We will start off our drink in a rocks glass that has already been pre-garnished so that we don't get any of the garnish in the drink, of course. And with this, I decided to use a little bit of baby's breath flowers. This is kind of to commemorate all the lives that were lost in that unfortunate disaster. There's a lot of little buds in here and it's beautiful, and since they're small white, it actually reminds me of Edelweiss, which is actually the national flower of Austria, which many of the Austrians and Germans had really close relations and went back and forth all the time. So kind of a little note there, but I really like this garnish and I think it will do well for our drink here. Moving on to the alcohols, let us begin with 1 ounce of Jägermeister. Now, when I was initially thinking of how the heck I was going to make a drink for the Hindenburg, I thought, well, how did the Hindenburg end? Well, unfortunately, it ended by crashing into the earth, the American soil in New Jersey. And so I thought that the best thing to do was to take the most iconic German liquor, Jägermeister, and probably the most iconic name in American alcohol, or at least American whiskey, Jack Daniels, and combine the two. So we're going to put in 1 ounce of each of those very famous liquors here. So we're using Jack Daniels honey because this is actually really going to do well with the flavor profile that we have here. It may not be entirely relevant necessarily to the story, but also an important thing with making drinks is to make sure it tastes good, and this will work really, really well with Jägermeister and the beer as well. So we'll throw that in there. There we go. Poured in a little bit too much, but it's okay. We can clean that up later. And then finally, our last ingredient into our drink here is the Eyinger Dark Dunkel beer. Sorry for that mispronunciation. It can be a little bit difficult sometimes, but this is an absolutely fantastic beer on its own. It's malty, it's delicious. It's also protected by the EU, so that's pretty cool. And I think it will be a tremendous ode, not only to Germany's liquor, but to their love of beer as well, which, I mean, the Hindenburg was the pride of Germany at the time, especially in their airships, and to see that fall is really tragic for them. So I think this is for them. We're going to put in 1.5 ounces of the Dark Dunkel beer here. Just push over our garnish a little bit, just to make sure that it doesn't get too much in the way. And now that we have all that in, we're just going to slowly mix these together to get them all nice and friendly. And there you have it, the steel balloon. And I gotta say, it is kind of beautiful to look at. I actually really like the garnish here. I think it plays really well off the dark colors of the liquors, and it's pretty remarkable. I think this will look good, and I really think it's going to taste good too. So let's give it a try. That is fantastic, honestly. Oh my gosh. For two majorly different flavors to come crashing together in the Jack Daniel's and the Jägermeister, they work so well. The sweet anise of the Jägermeister really goes well with the whiskey, the little woody whiskiness of the Jack Daniel's, and that honey flavoring is really nice. It's kind of a balancing act, and I mean, the anise flavor in Jägermeister isn't overpowering anyway. It's not like you're drinking, let's say, absinthe or anisette or anything like that. So these two already go well together. But then you throw in the maltiness, the delicious dark dunkel beer, and that just raises it even more. And especially with the carbonation from the beer as well, it makes it a much lighter drink, a much bubblier drink, something that's very refreshing at the same time. This is a really, really tasty drink. It's pretty fantastic, and I think it is certainly as remarkable as the Hindenburg was in its day. And that sounds like last call. There are only a few things I really want to add on here to the Hindenburg's legacy, but they are pretty fantastic in information that I came across. One of them was actually in the name of the Hindenburg. When the head of the Zeppelin Committee in Germany decided to name the new airship the Hindenburg, it was named after Paul von Hindenburg, who was a former German president during the interwar years, or at least in between World War I and World War II, before Germany had Adolf Hitler as their Führer. And initially, Joseph Goebbels, who was the head of the propaganda committee in the new Nazi regime, actually asked the head of the Zeppelin Committee to say, hey, can we name this after Hitler? And he said, no, I don't think so. And instead kept it to Hindenburg, and Hindenburg's name would continue on until, unfortunately, had that really bad ending. But another really interesting fact here with the Hindenburg is that the Hindenburg was about the size of the Titanic in the sky. Just imagine that for a second. Imagine how big the Titanic was as a steamliner, right? And as that ship. And just put that up in the air. Now, mind you, they both had pretty similar endings, really, 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 really unfortunate endings, but they were both massive, fantastic ships with tons of luxury and really tested the bounds of what they were able to do, which was transportation. And it's just, I just can't even fathom looking up into the sky and seeing such a massive behemoth of an airship. And the last thing I wanted to mention here about the Hindenburg is that despite all of the safety protocols that they took and everything that was necessary to make sure that people were able to travel as safe as possible, the Hindenburg had one very interesting little accommodation for its people or its passengers as they went from place to place. Despite the fact that it had hydrogen keeping it buoyant in the hull, or balloon, I suppose, they had a smoker's lounge. Just let that sink in for a second. Just all the safety precautions. And I'm sure they still took them, because I'm fairly certain it wasn't a cigarette. Who knows? It could have been a cigarette that lit the ship on fire. But they had a smoker's lounge in an airship that was very flammable. Just think about that, just for a second. Pretty incredible stuff to think about. But regardless, the Hindenburg really was the airship of all airships, and unfortunately, it was also the last of the great airships, except for the Goodyear blimp. That still comes around every once in a while. And I look up at sporting games and I go, wow, that's the only time I'm gonna see a blimp. But yeah. Thank you all so much for watching. If you'd like to check out any of our other historically inspired cocktails, you can find them here, or you can also find them at topshelfhistory.com. There we also have all of our blogs, recipes, deep dives, and more. From all of us here at Top Shelf History, remember, history is better with a drink. Cheers.